because in South Africa, the colored group is a thing, and it's not necessarily a thing in for example, in America, right? You have mixed race people who are normally associated as part of the black group. And here, as you said, Trevor kind of volunteers as black when he's given the choice most of the time. But that was only kind of because they had the three different groups. So there's a different racial dynamic that goes on in South Africa than you have in America. And this was my thinking about apartheid, right? Trevor says that in America you had the kidnappings, you had the abductions, you had the slavery, and then you had segregation, right? Jim Crow. In South Africa, you had all three at the same time, all three going on concurrently. So it made me think that actually, when we look at racism as a thing, South Africa should be the premium example. South Africa should be the starting point for how we look at and understand racism, because colored people were given their own race, you know, and colored people are people like Trevor who could be considered mixed race, or people who are historically mixed race because they've come from, you know, Dutch settlers, the Afrikaners, and old South Africans. So when we look at racism, I always emphasize this point that, you know, racism is about privilege and power. It's about the first time the word racism comes in the English language, it's about separating black and white into different educational groups to make it easier to, you know, teach one group one thing and another group another thing. And I thought, like, this is it. South Africa is the premium example of racism in the world. What do you think?
Yeah, it's very true the way he exposes race as completely illogical. And like you said, being based on privilege and power, particularly when he talks about the kind of Indians or the Chinese or Japanese in South Africa, and how they don't fit into any of these kind of made up neat categories that has been set, but based on their position and power and resource and privilege, get told that, okay, you can be in the black group, you can be in the white group. So I really like how he exposes the fact that there's just absolutely no tangible logic to racism.
Right. And this is something that psychologist Dr. Umar said. You know Dr. Umar.
Yeah.
He said this in I think he said this in an interview once. He said that, you know, what the white power structure can do is it can kind of give out kind of membership of whiteness, right? And this is what happened with the Japanese, and the difference between the Japanese and the Chinese in South Africa. What the South African government did is that it gave Chinese people, it didn't know what to do with them. So it said, okay, you know, you just can go with the blacks kind of thing. We don't really know what to do with you. But with the Japanese people, it gave them the status of whiteness, you know, which is amazing, you know. So it allowed Japanese people rights and privileges in society that even Chinese people, black people, colored people did not have. So I think that really speaks to the operation of race as a tool to oppress and so on and so forth, which is what it's about, which is why I emphasize the institutional aspect of racism rather than the casual kind of day-to-day what we might regard as racism. And I think that's what Trevor's done in the book. When he's describing how Soweto is built, he's describing the fact that there are only two roads in. There's one road in and one road out. And that's because it's easier to control people if there's a riot, right? So it's like the operation of the state in physically affecting people's lives, not so much, you know, what somebody might call you like when you went down the street, although that there was that aspect too.